And welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival's Revolution Then and Now discussion with our featured guest, Miss Judy Gumbo. Yes. My name is Dante King. I am the moderator today. I also am an author as well. I wrote a book recently called The 400-Year Holocaust. The subtitle is White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide and the Revolt Against Critical Race Theory. So I'll ask a question to Judy about some of the things that she refers to in her book. I want to remind everyone, if you could please silence your phones or turn them off now, that would be great. I also want to acknowledge Sausalito Books by the Bay, who is the sponsor for this particular talk. And if it were not for them, we wouldn't be able to be here. So let's give them a thank you and a round of applause. I also first want to say thank you to David Talbot, who could not be here today, as well as his sister Margaret Talbot. They are the reason that I'm here. He asked me to come. He's a personal friend of mine. They had some exposure to COVID-19 and unfortunately could not make the event. So we want to wish them well. And I would encourage you, in addition to supporting Yippie Girl, which is the book that we'll be talking about. Yes, we can clap. There's also, we're going to be discussing By the Light of the Burning Dreams, which is written by David and Margaret Talbot as well. So I may ask some questions from here. We'll discuss a little bit about it. And then after this session, Judy and I will both go over across the street, over to Austin Way, where the book signing area is located. And Judy will be signing books there.
Yes.
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 I will also be joining her. I'll be signing some books there too. And that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy so that she can have some words, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Dante. It's very nice to meet you. We've been in touch online, but never in person. So this is great, and I'm just really delighted to be here and to see everyone who's here. It's a pleasure, and I'm just really happy to be able to tell you a little bit about Yippie Girl and a little bit about myself. And please feel free to ask questions.
Yes. So I'm going to read a quick introduction for those of you who may not be as familiar with Judy's work and some of what she's done. Others of you are, I can tell. So Judy Gumbo is a highly esteemed and world-renowned author. She is one of the few female one of the few female members of the original Yippies, the Youth International Party, a protest group founded in the 1960s. The group was involved in organizing Chicago 1968 protests that led to arrests and to the Chicago conspiracy trial. As part of her activism, Judy was involved in notorious feminist organizations, radical environmentalism, visited North Vietnam during the war, and traveled the globe agitating against the war and for the liberation of women. Her activism led to illegal surveillance by the FBI. She later successfully sued to obtain copies of their extensive records on her. And I have to just point out that in this book, she does a phenomenal job of including a lot of the notes that were taken by the FBI that were directly surveilling her and her partner at the time, and just the organization as a whole. And it's riveting when you read what they were saying. There's documentation like this about the Black Panther Party, we know that. They kept similar documentation on people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So I just want to say thank you for documenting that.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So, did you want to say anything in terms of just some opening remarks?
Go ahead. Ask.
Okay.
It's easier if you ask questions, then I can come up with answers.
All right. So I'll start off here. In By the Light of the Burning Dreams, David and Margaret Talbot lay out many parallels to the things that you speak about in your book and some of the things that you experienced personally, specifically the parallels between the Black Panther Party, issues surrounding the Chicago conspiracy trial, conflicts surrounding the Vietnam War, as well as the feminist movement. When you look back on all that was happening during that period, what do you see as the common theme to all of those movements and or the underlying motivations?
I think that the common theme, it's a good question. I think that the common theme was morality and fighting for justice. And if you look at everybody, from the Panthers to the women's movement, everyone, we had our different versions of what that meant. We implemented it in different ways, from absolute pacifism to bombings. But we all were doing it and believing that we were doing it for the sake of a moral imperative, which was to end the war in Vietnam. And then subsequently for the Panthers, for Black liberation, for the women, for women's liberation. But that came along a little later. Initially, it was the moral commitment to end the war in Vietnam. And it was really a result of the civil rights movement, which influenced all of us, but didn't necessarily involve all of us, because it came a little earlier.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think the underlying motivations, as I just kind of see it, it came out of deprivation and people feeling that they were not being treated as humans. And we see that now. I think we feel a lot of the intensity behind that now in terms of some of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
So that moves me to my next question. What are your thoughts about all of the effort that went into the fight to legalize abortions in the early to mid 20th century, early mid to late 20th century, and where we are now concerning the recent draft decision that was recently issued by the U.S. Supreme Court, or leaked?
Thank you, Dante. That question is actually a horrific one that we have to be asking it right now in 2022. I mean, it's outrageous, it's disgusting, and we must face it. Now, I when I was prepping for this, I actually, and I'll just do it now because I think it's so important. I wanted to say a number of things. First of all, let me just get to my notes here. First of all, I came up with a 7-point program of what people can do, and I'm an activist, right? I like to jump in right away. It's fine to talk about the background. It's fine to talk about how it's oppressing women and men. What this decision by Injustice Alito could potentially do, because that's my name for him, Injustice Alito. What the Supreme Court could potentially do. But I think that all of us here, every single person in this room who has any interest in preserving freedom of choice in this country needs to come up with and think about what can you do individually. Because if you don't do it, who will? And if not now, when? Mm-hmm. I mean, really, my model actually for thinking about this, I had two. One was the civil rights workers who went down to the South to help organize for Black voters' rights. It's time now, I think, for us to think about what we can do. Where can we go to travel, to organize for women's right to choose? And I think that that's really important. And then the other thing that inspired me was thinking about the Panther 10-point platform and program. I don't know if you've read the original one, but it's very compelling as to, we want, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but you can look it up, and it's very, very compelling as to what it's possible to do for Black liberation. It's now very important, I think, for us to develop a program for women's liberation that focuses specifically on the harm that if this horrific thing passes, we will all be faced with. So I came up, all on my own. That's not quite true. With also the help of my hairstylist, who is really good. Seriously, she's really good. She describes. Let me get to it. She describes herself as a loud, proud mother who firmly believes in a woman's right to choose. And one of her points was that men too must speak up. This is not just an issue for women. It's an issue for every sentient human being with compassion who lives here in this country. Now, let me give you my 7-point program, and then I'd like just to read a little bit from Yippie Girl about what I wrote about my own abortion, okay? So this is my 7-point program for us, okay? Point number 1, as I just said, model your actions on 1960s civil rights workers who went south to ensure voting rights for Black people. They can be our model for today. Let's find out if we're wanted. We can't just sort of arrive. Let's find out if we're wanted. Then travel to the American Taliban states, and we know which states those are, to support clinics that provide abortion care. Or go to or organize a mass mobilization based on the level of anger that you feel and what you feel comfortable doing. In other words, I don't think people should do things at this point that are beyond what they feel comfortable with, because you may find, as I did and many other people have, the more you participate in protest, the more comfortable you feel doing it. So I think a mass movement, a mass confrontation, and just so you know, on behalf of our local Planned Parenthood, which is Planned Parenthood of Mar Monte here in Berkeley in this area, or San Francisco Planned Parenthood, there will be a peaceful protest on Saturday, May 14th. So I'm just announcing that and hope that people here will consider taking part in it. You can also, by the way, organize your own personal protest. You can sit in, you can blockade, you can picket every federal courthouse in the Bay Area and organize your friends in other states to do so. Like I say, it depends on your comfort level. You can give money. Money is very important, and those of us who are capable and have the means to do that, we should be stretching ourselves. Especially, remember, today is Mother's Day, right? Let's all give a Mother's Day gift to our local Planned Parenthood or to whichever other clinic that you know of that provides abortion care, and you can designate it for abortion care to keep the clinics functioning, for bail, for transportation, for medical supplies, for temporary housing. Each one, teach one. All right, you can also take a risk. You can support and build an underground railroad, which is going to be needed if this anti-abortion horror passes, especially in what I'm calling the Taliban states. We're going to need an underground railroad. Now, I'm not the person who knows exactly how to do that, but I know that there are people who do. So that is something that you can do to participate, to help. And if you happen to be a doctor or a nurse or in the medical profession, you can form or support medical brigades. You can connect up with out-of-state doctors and pay for or offer medical supplies. It's a very multiple step kind of thing. And there's always RU486, which is the so-called abortion pill. It is available. You as an individual here can order it, and you can transport it down yourself to where it's needed if you feel able and capable of doing that. So there's many things, many possibilities that we can participate in. And what I'm doing is, especially because you asked, is urging you to consider seriously consider what it is that you feel comfortable with that you can do to help all the women and anyone who is capable of bearing children, all people, all folks, help make it easier and help get the politics out of this decision. And don't be fooled into thinking that the backlash is directed only at those who can become pregnant, because it's going to be far-reaching, homophobic, and it is patriarchal. And that's what we all have to remember. So I'm asking you to make your personal commitment to help provide abortion care, as we used to say in the 60s, thanks to the Panthers, by any means necessary, okay? So I just want to now read a little bit of what I actually wrote about the abortion that I had, because it was kind of interesting in that, where did I put it? In that it was it was the year before Roe became law. So it was there was like a middle area. And let's find it, okay. So I got pregnant. I was in Miami, in San Diego, and I became friends with and hooked up with a very interesting, wonderful man whose name was Paul Mayer. He's now deceased. And Paul was a Jew who became a Jesuit and then left the order. So he was thoughtful and very interesting. And so this is what I wrote. I did, however, excoriate myself, not Reverend P, for getting pregnant. It was my sense of self-importance that did me in. I'd spent too much time on the road protesting wars to waste my time, or so I thought, seeking out a doctor willing to prescribe contraceptives, even though I'd heard that earlier that year, which is 1972, the Supreme Court had legalized oral contraceptives for all women, not just married ones. So that's where we were in 1972. All women, not just married ones, legalized in 72. After Texas, my need to find a doctor to prescribe oral contraceptives wasn't strong. I delayed. I procrastinated. I was lazy. It was easier to stay loyal to my diaphragm with its gooey contraceptive gel, but diaphragms can fail, and that's what happened. And you can read for yourself the description of what it was actually like if you haven't had one. And what I did not do, which was not the right thing, I did not tell Reverend P that I was pregnant. I went and had the abortion, and then I told him. I guess I was frightened of what he would say. And this is what I said. I blurted out, "Paul, there's something I need to say to you." "What's that?" Reverend P replied in all innocence, his hand stroking my back in a way that made me tingle as if I was being caressed. "You know I've been saying how I wasn't feeling well? Turns out I was pregnant. I went to a clinic yesterday and had an abortion." Then, as if to rationalize my behavior, I added, "It didn't feel like such a big deal." I watched Reverend P's face change from pink to white as he sat up and said, a wobble in his voice, "Why didn't you tell me this before you did it? Why didn't you ask me first?" There are reasons women have abortions without informing the father. Every woman has one, most frequently rape or physical abuse. My dominant reason was ideology. "It's my body. It was my decision, not yours," I replied, defensive but unbowed. Reverend P stood up, turned his naked butt to me, slipped on his pants, and silently left the room. He also left my life. I would not see him again until decades later, when we greeted each other as old friends, him sitting on the grass, surrounded by his wife and children at yet another rally against yet another imperial war. Today, I am a mother and a grandmother. I am forever grateful I had access to abortion care when I was 29 years old, single, broke, and unemployed without pay in the service of ending unjust wars. This I know. Had I allowed those cells to grow, my life's course would have altered in a manner unfair to any unborn child and untenable to me. In 1972, that year before Roe v. Wade became law, having an abortion wasn't a sin, it wasn't a crime, and it wasn't a baby.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For sharing all of that. I know I've had some reactions to seeing what's currently happening and the potential ruling that's going to be made by the Supreme Court from the perspective of being Black and understanding the way in which the Supreme Court ruled that certain parts of the 14th Amendment didn't apply to Black people between roughly 1873 in 1896. There are 7 Supreme Court decisions that continue to rule that Black people weren't deserving of rights, that legalized white extremism against Black people. And so in understanding the magnitude of what's possible through the political, legal, and governmental apparatus, progress is not linear, you know, and I think we also have to interrogate and investigate what we see as progress in terms of people who have been marginalized in communities that have been oppressed. We're dealt a measuring stick, if you will, or a container that constitutes that we should see XYZ as progress when it really isn't. It really isn't. It's just managed oppression, and we're guided to accept it as though it's something that we should be hopeful for or grateful for, and it's really a tool of oppression. So anyway, thank you for all of your activism and perspective that you share.
Let me just say, everyone needs to make their own choice in terms of what works for them. It's not up to me or you or to dictate to anyone here. It's up to you to know and learn as much as you can and then do what you feel is the right thing for you. Hopefully it will be to protest against this, what I consider to be a potentially terrible decision. But hey, making one's own choice about choice is really what I'm asking everyone here to do.
Yeah, I mean, but just as you mentioned, this has far and wide-reaching potential ramifications.
Yep.
Right? So if you know, you have a group of people who are determining in this moment that, hey, the federal court should never have stepped in. This should have been, you know, something that was decided at the state level or, you know, state to state. That could also be determined about the 65 voting rights, the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Exactly.
In any moment. It could be determined or applied to gay marriage, depending upon how these individuals or a group of individuals at any given time choose to interpret it or the way that they feel about it. I think it's very dangerous.
Yep. Should we ask for questions maybe at this point? Or do you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to leave.
Go for it.
Okay. Unless you...
No, go for it.
One of the things you talk about, and it's kind of along these lines, you took a picture of finding an FBI tracking device on your vehicle in 1975, which was done through, again, illegal surveillance, which were yours and Stu's. What were yours and Stu Albert's thoughts and feelings at the time about that situation, about that predicament? And you write, there's an excerpt that I was going to read, but...
no, you could, go ahead.
Well, you say in here on, page 55, actually, you say, Stu went on to tell me about a second famous Yippie act that took place in November of 1967, a mainstream, in other words, serious and traditional protest organization called the Mobe Organization, a huge march in Washington, D.C. against the Vietnam War. The Yippies, by contrast, arranged an exorcism of the Pentagon and led the crowd in an effort to levitate the giant building that was the center of the U.S. war machine. They got thousands of people to shout at the Pentagon, "Out, demons, out." The levitation was successful. Stu always claimed the Yippies raised the Pentagon 6 feet off the ground. I guess how high the Pentagon rose depended on how much pot you'd smoked. That time, plenty of people were arrested. I discovered decades later that even the FBI acknowledged the worth of our Yippie strategy. In the 12-point plan to disrupt the anti-war movement dated in July 1968, an agent made this claim about the Yippies: ridicule is the most potent weapon we can use against them. The FBI, a truly serious, straight-laced organization, never tried it. I was there in spirit, but not in person, when the Yippies brought the stock exchange to a halt and levitated the Pentagon. I chalked it up to my bad luck and good. I missed the founding party, but I did hook up with Stu in time for the third and greatest Yippie action, the confrontation in Chicago at the August 1968 Democratic National Convention. Chicago 1968 became the crown jewel of events in Yippie history, and I was there. But that part about the FBI, yeah, what were your thoughts about your run-ins and experiences with them ongoing?
Well, that is a very good question, and actually I have here a picture of, and it's in my book. It's in Yippie Girl. Here's a picture of. There's Stu, there's me, and this is the attorney Bill Kunstler, and there is the tracking device that was on that the FBI had put in on the rear bumper of my car. Now, what did I think about it? Well, I wasn't surprised. I was surprised that I'd found something. I'll tell you how that happened. We were in New York City. I was missing my graduation, my PhD graduation at University of Toronto, because that was just bougie stuff. And so we were in New York City visiting attorney Bill Kunstler and Margie Ratner, and everything was just a little weird, you know? Parked the car and everything was weird, and there was this guy sort of in front of their house with a hat down like this, and he scurried away like a rat. And we stayed with Bill and Margie that evening, and the next morning came out, and there was another guy in hat down like this, and again scurrying away like a rat. And so that sort of alerted me to something, and it was a snowy, winter, cold, day, and walked around the car, and on the rear of the car there was everything was was full of dirt and dust from our drive down from the Catskill Mountains, except one area that was completely bare, and there was a little wire hanging down from that area, and so. I reached in and tried to get it off, and I couldn't. And I said to Stu, all right, we gotta, you get out of the car and I'll see if I can start it, because I figured it might be a bomb, right? And he said, no, I don't want to have a reputation that sexist survives. And so I actually managed to pull off just a battery with a piece of tape, which of course meant nothing. Right? I couldn't do anything with a battery with a piece of tape. So what do you do when you don't know what to do with a battery and a piece of tape? You go have Chinese food. And that's what we did. We went and had Chinese food, and in the meantime, the FBI came and took off the battery that I disabled by taking out the homing device, tracking device that I disabled, and came and put a new device on. I mean, really. So Stu and I got in the car and we drove, and when we'd originally driven to where we were, that we'd been followed by 3 cars and a horse and buggy. And the horse and buggy actually was just something from Central Park, which is where we were close to. So we drove, and all of a sudden I noticed we had a tail, right? We had 3 cars behind us, and drove to the attorney Bill Kunstler and Margie Ratner's house. And Bill, with his strong hands, and he was a large person, he pulled off a completely functional tracking device. And so that was sort of how I discovered that there was a problem, right? A problem. And so at first I was really proud of finding it. And that was great. But then afterwards, it actually got kind of scary. I mean, why in the world were they doing this to us? Because we literally had driven down from the Catskills. That's where Stu and I had our cabin. That's what we did. And you can find out all about it in my book, Yippie Girl, right? So we'd driven down from the Catskills, and that was it. That was all that had happened. And all of a sudden, here was this fully functional tracking device that Bill Kunstler, the attorney, took off a car. Now, the really funny thing is that they actually Bill worked for the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York City. The FBI broke in there and took back the tracking device. And I believe the reason is otherwise they would have had to report it to the higher-ups, and they'd be in deep doo-doo. So then we went to visit two friends. A little scared we were at that point. And one friend was a member of of an anti-war group called the Oakland Seven. And we knocked on his door, that he lived in New York, knocked on his door, and I heard two locks, and he was white-faced. And he basically said, "Go away, go away." I guess, I don't know how he knew, but I don't remember how he knew, but maybe it was in the papers, I don't know. But anyway, he said, "Go away." So we did. And so instead, Stu had this idea. Stu was friends with a famous pornographer named Al Goldstein, who was the publisher of Screw magazine. I'm sure that everybody in this room who's a male and over 50 may have read Screw if you lived in New York City. However, I said, "Stu," being a feminist, I said, "Stu, we can't go to Al." And he said, "We're going to Al." And we did, I remember walking up the stairs to Al's apartment. Both sides were penis candles. Candles with wicks that looked like penises. And Al was completely welcoming. And he took us in, he fed us, we stayed there overnight, and the next morning we were in much better shape emotionally and psychologically to go back to where we were living in the Catskills. So it was a little bit of a lesson to me that an anti-war activist, the first person that we'd visited, was just unable to cope with us or our situation, whereas a well-known pornographer welcomed us. I don't know how I got off on that, but here I am.
Wow, no, thank you for sharing all of it. I love just hearing about people's personal accounts, historical accounts. But when I saw just kind of this chase that you endured and experienced, and just knowing what has happened to some of the other folks I mentioned earlier,
yeah.
It really reinforces the way in which the FBI was set up and functioned as a police state against anyone who was trying to disrupt a white, patriarchal, police and legal cultural state, if you will.
Right.
And you make that point, like that was their objective. They stated it in a roundabout way in their mission.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to one more question, and then we'll take some from the audience. This is a very layered question, so I want to preface it. There are many layers to it.
Okay.
And there was a portion of your book towards the beginning that spoke out to me, and I had a different take on it that I both wanted to share and also solicit a response from you about, if that's okay. So I'm going to start off by saying I want to give a trigger warning before venturing off onto this next topic. I also want to state that as a victim of continual sexual abuse, having been repeatedly molested as a child, experiencing something pretty severe in my early adulthood, as well as having many Black women and girls survivors in my own family who have experienced the same types of atrocities, I take acts of sexual violence personally very seriously. I detest such acts and people who commit them. I also want to recognize that there may be some people here today with us in this room and hope that this is not triggering for anyone. In your book, you quoted from Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, where he talks about rape as an insurrectionary act. He actually stated in his book, it delighted me that I was defying and trampling on the white man's law upon his system of values, and that I was defiling his women was the most satisfying to me, because I was very resentful over the historical fact of how the white man has used black women. I felt I was getting revenge. One of the things I actually focus on in my book is the construction of the white American government, political, and legal systems. I quote authors such as Darlene Clark Hine, Patricia Hill Collins, and Jennifer Riggins, to name a few, in bringing to light many of the ways in which white men here in America, with the support and complicity of white women, through both legal and cultural practice, sanctioned, permitted, and committed rapes of black women between the early 1600s until roughly 1959 without ever facing convictions. In my book, I give examples of state laws that exempted black women from rape. I also provide a plethora of court rulings, including ones from Missouri, the Missouri Supreme Court in 1855, the Mississippi Supreme Court in 1859, which actually ruled that because black women were promiscuous, they couldn't be raped. And in Florida in 1918, where they ruled that because black women were immoral, they couldn't be raped. And this continued to go on. I often think about my mother. I think about my grandparents, my great-grandparents who lived during these periods and had to navigate this circumstance. And in reading what you wrote, I thought about the way in which Eldridge Cleaver and what he expressed in that moment was very similar to the kind of the thoughts that I've had and things that I've explored in helping me to understand the Black rage, which James Baldwin talked a lot about. I believe a deeper question to explore would be, because you talked about your reactions to reading that and kind of how you felt about it, and I believe a deeper question to explore would be, what would drive someone, anyone, to the point of feeling as though they need to use rape as a tool for revenge? As James Baldwin continued to profess throughout his life, Black rage and anger is the result of white sociopathy and terrorism towards Black people. Put another way, the Black rapist, the Black criminal, and all of the faults of Black people are the results of white terrorism. And I just wanted to get your thoughts.
I basically agree with that. I agree with Baldwin. And it may not be popular, but it is my experience. And knowing Eldridge well, as I did, and Kathleen, who is still a friend of mine, there is such a difference in Black lives and white lives, and who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. Black lives matter, right? Black lives matter. And while I don't in any way condone rape or racism, I think that it's really up to members of the Black community to define how they want to relate to that in the Black community, and it's up to us, I think, to go along with what Black people decide as to how to handle it. It's a very different situation if you're of color and if you're white.
Yeah, it very much is, and I think much of that is, understanding the ways in which we've been programmed and understanding our history to get a deeper understanding of why many Black writers such as Angela Davis, W.E.B. Du Bois, Toni Morrison, why they have written with such passion and conviction about the things that they've written about,
Right.
And why Eldridge Cleaver chose to express the way that he does. You have to understand history to understand Black pain. And I think in one of the things that I interrogate, and we're going to go to questions, in my book, is understanding how these laws literally constructed. And Theodore Allen, in his book, The Invention of the White Race, he talks about how these laws were an educative process in training and programming white people around what it meant to be white. And so to legalize rape for centuries, to have that located in the actual cultural and legal social identity of whiteness, I think that has to be interrogated, right, before we interrogate and or crucify Black people who may choose to express their reactions about predicaments that their family members and people in larger community have suffered. So with that said.
Yeah, I think that in this case, Black women are the ones that we need to listen to.
Absolutely.
Of all the, in this very, very complex dynamic, Black women certainly are the ones who are most victimized and most attuned and also fight back. I mean, so that's kind of my sense.
Yeah.
And
I'll say this too, the sons and daughters that they raise too, because we then have to be parented through that trauma.
Yeah.
It's destructive to the community as a whole.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So we're now going to go to a Q&A, a brief Q&A. We have about 15 minutes. And who would like to ask a question? I see. Oh, this is great. Okay, so someone right here, and then number 2, and then someone over here. Okay.
My question is really brief about your 7-point activism list. I mean, do you have a website or something for that about abortion?
I have a website. I have actually 2 websites. I have, let me see, because we've just changed them. I have Judy Gumbo, and I have Yippie Girl, and they're both .coms. And that's what's available at the moment. And the Judy Gumbo is very, it's an old website, it's an older website, and it's very detailed and has an awful lot of interesting things on it. The YippieGirl.com is specifically around my book, Yippie Girl, Exploits in Protest and Defeating the FBI. And I'm happy to answer questions. In other words, if you can contact me through both those websites, and I'm happy to answer more detailed questions that I'm not answering at this instant.
Is your plan on there on the website?
Is my what?
Your plan that you spoke about, your 7-point plan?
No, it isn't, but it can be.
Okay, I think she wants to access.
Oh, is that it? Is it the? Yeah. I will put it up, or if you come up afterwards and give me your email address, I'll just send you what I did.
Put it on the website.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know, and you can put links to like some of the organizations maybe that like people could give to. That would be great. I don't want to put more work on you.
No, well, yes, you do, but it's okay.
I'll do it. I always tell people, why don't you do that? All right, we had another question right over here.
Oh, okay. So I actually have a story that I'm interested in you reacting to. It regards 1968, and it regards this quality of people having very different overlapping and non-overlapping cultural values. So thinking about Eldridge Cleaver, and you talked about him in Yippie Girl being misogynist, and now there's this story about the issue of revenge. So the story is that I lived in a big group household here in Berkeley many years ago, and there was a man who was a friend and visitor who just rubbed me the wrong way. He was culturally really different from the household. And at one point, I said, so who is this guy, and why is this guy who feels like a right-winger hanging out in this household of progressives? And somebody explained to me that they were friends from 1968, and he had been basically a right-winger who was there in the protests, and he saw a policeman starting to beat a pregnant woman. And his values were family, protecting women, protecting children, and he had this clash of supporting the police, and what the policeman was doing was completely unacceptable in his other values. So he became this odd progressive. I mean, he switched parties and so forth, but his cultural background didn't change. There were lots of ways where he rubbed me the wrong way as a young feminist woman. And so it seems to me that you were in the middle of that in so many ways, where feminism clashed with support of Black men and Black values. And I'm curious, just your reaction to this idea of, would you welcome somebody like that? How did you feel about his crossing lines?
Well, Mary, I think the answer to that is it depends when. There was a certain point at which it would have been absolutely intolerable to have someone who was the way you described this person at the beginning. But at the same time, and there was a period of time here in Berkeley and in the movement, the social protest movement as a whole, where people were leaving and going off into various different factions and various different groups. So and certainly, so my sense is that someone like that would either have been would have gone and formed a group of like-minded people, or would have been kicked out of a number of the groups that I was part of. But then, I was kicked out, or Tom Hayden was kicked out, or Stu was kicked out. So there was a period of real disruption as people were trying to find the core, find and define the core values that we wanted to act on. I would be interested to know what happened to this person and whether he remained sort of supporting both, which is kind of what you're saying, or whether he went in one direction or another.
What he did was he decked the policeman.
Okay, that's a way to do it.
He intervened to protect the woman, and he was thrown in jail with a bunch of the leftists.
Yeah.
And so that's how he became friends with the people who were in jail.
Wow, thank you very much. So we'll go to this one woman here, and then I believe my friend, and then there's a hand in the back.
Hey, Judy, your book is a magnificent call to action and a feminist history of a very important period in our history. And in addition, it's a memoir. And so I wanted to know if you could just talk a little bit about what it was like to write a memoir, the process of writing a memoir.
Oh, that is a good and not an easy question to answer. And I don't know whether my experience parallels other people who have written memoirs, or whether it's to the extent to which it's unique. For me, it started out as a process of grieving Stu's death. It was a way for me to grieve his death, because he died at age 66. And then I took classes. I learned to write better, and then so it just evolved. I mean, does that answer? Say your question again, the end of your question again, because it's left my mind briefly.
Just briefly, the process of writing, how long it took, and what it was like, what it felt like to you, as what your emotions and experience felt like as you were writing this memoir. I know could be a very long answer, and it's going to be unique, whatever yours is.
Well, what it felt like is it was really difficult, because I really had worked for Planned Parenthood and written fundraising letters before that. Stu and I had published a book called The 60s Papers back in 1984. Interesting year to publish it. But it was mostly segments of other people's writing, and we wrote introductions. So to write a memoir at that point was very difficult. And I started out, because I both had to learn to write in a way that I wanted to write, and also have the history at least not boring and interesting. And so I went through, and it really took years, and I wrote, and then I changed, and I wrote, and then I changed, and then someone else read it and said, well, what about this? Or Steve Wasserman, who's sitting over there, read it and said, well, what about that? And people really helped me do it, but I wasn't able until right close to the end to actually write well about what I was feeling and what it meant to me, what doing what I did meant to me. And that was really the arc of the book. And then I was like 3/4 of the way through, and my fourth husband, Art, who was sitting right there, who was also a writer, but of ancient Greek and ancient Rome, helped push me through, because I was getting too involved in being a perfectionist. I had to have it this way, and I had to have it this way, and I just couldn't really relax enough to say, okay, I can live with it if it isn't perfect. So Art pushed me through and actually got that part done. And then, of course, there was the whole issue of finding a publisher, which was a whole different issue. I had a number of people who read it, who many of whom rejected me in terms of being an agent. One woman didn't, but she just wanted me to write a completely different book. That took 2 years. And so eventually I hooked up with Three Rooms Press, and they were quite happy and did, I think, an excellent job in actually putting the book together in a way that was, they helped me. They did a great, terrific editing job, and I was pleased. I was pleased, and here it is. It's a real book. Oh my God, a real book. And it's seeing it, seeing it, right? Seeing it like this was enormously satisfying, enormous. So I hope that answers the question.
This is great. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So we'll get to Art, and then there's just a woman right there who had her hand raised in the back.
In terms of thinking about unity, one of the great stories in the book is that Bobby Seale, the chairman of the Black Panther Party, came to you in early 1968 and said, we're having a big Free Huey demonstration and rally in San Francisco. Would you address the Free Huey rally? And then he said, also, I heard that you're now into women's liberation. Well, I think all people should be liberated, so why don't you talk at the Huey rally about women's liberation? And that's the Black Panthers as they really were, as people who were seeking allies all over the place among radical folks.
Thank you for highlighting that. Did you want to speak to that?
Thanks, Artie.
Yes.
You hit it right on the head.
Yes. Yeah. And then there's a question.
Hi, I'm a retired high school librarian, and one of the things everybody in my profession does is teach our students how to find correct and true information, which, as we all know, has been under terrible, terrible attacks. My big concern now, especially about libraries, is the attacks on history, and you mentioned it about people understanding the history. So I'm concerned how we will grow the new generation of activists if they don't know the history, if they don't know about the slave trade, if they don't know about the oppression of labor movements and women. So, any suggestions?
Well, that is not an easy question to answer, because young people don't want to be told what to do, as we know, right? They want to discover it for themselves. So I think just putting out why history is important and that it can be found in libraries is a definite way to do it, but I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't know the answer. I mean, it's like we need to continue to push the experiences that we've had, but really it takes, young people have got to discover it for themselves. That is the way young people are. And to the extent that it's a welcoming environment, to the extent that there's things that are interested, to the extent there's programs that are outreach programs, all good. But I wish I had a better answer for you.
Okay, we have maybe one or two more questions. We'll go to this woman here in the tan coat or brownish tan coat, right there. Yeah. I just want to say before she asks her question, I by no means or understand or know what the author Alice Walker wrote, and I'm not personally concerned with it. I do know that she was invited to the book fest and then she was disinvited at the last minute, and I personally take issue with that and wanted to raise that. I think this country and its institutions has a history of really coming after black people in ways that are very rigid, and she should have at least been given a platform to express
Right.
and to, answer any questions or concerns people had about what it was she wrote. Like I said, I don't know, but I don't like seeing black women isolated and further marginalized.
Right.
Anyway.
So this is along the lines of the last question, but as a young activist, what advice do you have for getting involved with movements, for getting educated, and where can I best utilize my time?
All right, what I could hear, it was a little hard for me to hear, but what advice do I have for activists to stay involved?
Yeah, for young activists specifically.
I guess my answer is you have to remain committed to your values. And as you grow older, your staying involved has to change, because there are things that you can do when you're your age that you can't do. I'm 78. Can't do at my age. But it's maintaining the commitment to activism, however you are capable of doing it at that moment, and never giving up, and looking to people who are role models for you, whoever they happen to be. So that's kind of I wish I had a magic wand. If I had a magic wand, I would sort of wave it and everyone would continue to be young, healthy, vigorous, and activist. But sadly I can't do that, but we can maintain our commitment. And we can look at the society in which we live and say, how can that be changed? And don't get me started on what could possibly happen that's negative. Okay, don't get me started. Just remember, we must keep fighting. We must keep fighting for the positives that we know are right and we believe in as activists.
And Meredith Lasseur said, don't splinter the movement.
Yeah, exactly. Don't splinter the movement.
All right, well, thank you very much. I want to just say thank you again to you, Judy, for revealing yourself in this way. The book is very powerful. I would offer to all of you that not only should you go out and get it, and there are copies again across the street, but buy a copy for friends, loved ones, family members, because it's one of the ways to the question that was just asked that we can continue the knowledge flow is for those of us who have the economic standing to buy books like this and to gift them to people, to young people especially, to do that. So I would really offer that for you to do that. We're going to wrap up. I would just want to lastly say Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you.
And Happy Mother's Day to all the women in the room. So get a round of applause to those of you birthing people. You may not identify as women, but birthing people. And we should work on monetizing motherhood. Like we really should. Anyway.
And I just need to add.
Any last words? Yeah.
And I'm delighted that you all came. I hope you enjoyed it. Yes, please buy Yippie Girl. And also, let's support those women who choose not to be mothers, or who, for various reasons, cannot be mothers. We are all fighting the same battle, which is for our own liberation and the liberation of the planet.
Yes.
Oh, and Dante, yeah.
What'd you say? And buy Dante's book. Oh, my book. Yes, please
All right.
support. Please support. And then also By the Light of Burning Dreams by Margaret and David Talbot. And we will see you all across the street, for those of you who want to come. At 12:45, we'll be over there signing books. I also want to say thank you, Katina, for being our escort. She's wonderful.